again, that caused a great furore. And my favourite letter of all time was in the Radio Times saying that I allowed my children to watch Vengeance in Varos, which to me was worse than the worst atrocities of the Second World War. So I thought, that's a bit extreme. It's a script, you know. And it does get
to fans of science fiction, Philip Martin remains best known for his work on Star Cops and Doctor Who. But Philip has written for theatre and radio as well as a wealth of television series, most notably Gangsters, a vivid and often violent drama which caused controversy in the mid-1970s. Here he looks back over his career to date and discusses the backstory behind several of his works, including Death on the Moon, the lost episode of Star Cops.
This mystery missing script of mine. I can remember that basically it was going to be an Agatha Christie style basis mystery whodunit, you know, and you had the characters, there were like 5 suspects on it because the Chinese, they were going to launch. What I remember was that it's supposed to be an equalization zone between, in gravity terms, between the Earth and the Moon. Whether this exists, I'm not absolutely sure, but for the purposes of the script it was, that debris would be launched into a particular site in space between the Moon and the Earth where it would stay because the gravitational forces were equal. And it was actually a NASA project. They actually considered this quite seriously, and as we were dealing with their research as well as a basis for the series, I fastened onto this. And so the debris would arrive on space so they could build a space city around the Moon. That was the idea. And shuttles would come from the Moon to this point in space to collect the material which had been brought out. And when one of these arrives one time, there's a dead Chinese worker on this. And this is the start of the mystery, really. And other red herrings go on, and each of these star cops are assigned to a particular suspect to find out whether they are it that went on. And so we had the unravelling of the mystery, various happenings. And I think somebody was poisoned. There was like a public opening of the project, and a character was poisoned and came down the chute because they were supposed to bring the first of the debris down that was going to build the space city down, and when it launched, a body comes shooting down the rail. So the mystery deepens and the bodies mount up, and Nathan Spring tries to sort it all out. Unfortunately, I can't remember exactly what happened, how what the payoff was at the end. I mean, there must have been a payoff because I wrote the script, and the script was almost ready to be filmed when it was pulled, and it was pulled because there'd been an electrician strike, and the BBC had this great backlog of programmes that they needed to fulfil to catch up, and so it became a question of priorities. And I think one of the things that instead of having 9 episodes, they'd settle for 8. And the unfortunate casualty was Death on the Moon, which was the title, of course. And I was very disappointed because it was a script that I'd had a lot of fun with, and everybody was looking forward to making, and it got quite near to being made because I remember talking to the cast. I mean, it must have had a read-through. It must have started to go into rehearsal because the cast couldn't believe that I'd taken what the Country House mystery and set it on the Moon, although I convinced them that in fact it was a perfect setup for a Country House mystery because all the people were isolated and there were certain things. And I remember that there was a character of a Swiss financier who was quite a fantastical character, who was I think he was the plotting behind it. I think it was something to do with taking over the project for gain and profit, which most crimes happen for. And I remember Nathan, a satellite link from Earth to the Moon, and Nathan on the Moon and the financier on Earth. And I think it might have been a public debate which Nathan interrogates him and gets him to crack, and he presents the evidence and unmasks the villain. And at that time, it was really quite a daring thing to have a satellite link like that. It's now become very familiar, but at that time, it was quite an exciting concept. And I quite like this 250,000 miles of space where the interrogation was taking place, really. Big disappointment that it was never made, really. But it was, yeah, I would have had fun. As I say, I wish I could remember all the total detail, but it's a long time ago now, and I've written other things since. I like the thing about Box, and I was already beginning to play with him in this case to be opened in a million years.
Well, Box,
Yes, Nathan.
we're on our holes. Where do you fancy going? Do you fancy visiting your birthplace?
Recondite Components factory in Guildford sadly no longer exists. It was closed in 2025.
Yes, all right, shut up.
He was starting to get a bit of a character, rather like Hal in 2001, where there shouldn't be a personality, but there is a personality by some mechanical means. There's been some juxtaposition of his interior, which gives him. And I guess if you have taken enough data, which you must have done by constantly talking to Nathan, it starts to make the connections rather like an advanced computer does, and it starts to develop a personality of its own. So I was going to have fun with that, and it is a great device because, of course, Nathan can muse to it. He can say, I don't understand this, I don't understand that, and find this out, and you test it. So there's quite a relationship. And in a way, it's almost the closest relationship that Nathan ever has that we see with this piece of mechanical, jiggery-pokery.
Box, get me out of here.
You have an appointment at the Catacomb of Domitilla the day after tomorrow.
Can't stand 2 more days at this rate.
I have no contact point for Miss Lena Margello.
Oh, I know. We'll contact Moonbase. Get her address from personnel files. Get hold of her, will you? Just gonna take a rain check.
Of course, I'd written lots of other things, before then and since, but what I'm mostly known for is, or notorious for, is Gangsters, the BBC One series, which was originally a film, then went into a 6-part series, and then a further 6-part series until I decided that it should end there. It should leave people wanting more. When Gangsters first came out, I'd been paid to research Birmingham as a location for possibly a crime in the similar way of the film French Connection. And I researched it, and what I discovered on the streets and with the criminals and the drugs and the policemen I talked to and everybody, the immigrants, the illegal immigrants, it was all based on fact, really. And they were saying this was Birmingham now. There was a fictional element within Gangsters that gave it the feeling of like a very rich cake. You can take the top layer if you want, which is just the story of a man coming out of prison trying to regain his territory and his lost money. Or you can have a snapshot of a city now of things that are really going on. And that when it was shown, it caused a great uproar. And the city fathers would meet, and I was condemned by the Bishop of Birmingham, and the News of the World were on the phone and everything. And they were all saying, no, not in Birmingham, not in Birmingham. This is just violent fantasy. And then there was a drug haul picked up of £2 million worth of heroin in Scratchwood Services, which is quite near to Birmingham. And then the day after that, 15 illegal immigrants were found in the Channel, in the Bristol Channel. And what was their destination? Birmingham. So we just said, look, if you don't believe this, just read the papers, please, And this has always been a problem with my work, is actually because and this is maybe why I was asked to contribute to Star Cops, is that it has a prophecy involved in a lot of it. And when I did the series, I had a character say that our aim is to get drugs into every schoolyard in Britain. And this again caused uproar because the Sunday Times called it, violent fantasy. This is just ridiculous, and all we have to do now is, look at the news, unfortunately. And so there is that element that is there. And so working on something like Star Cops, whereas Gangsters was based in the reality of that time, Gangsters became ultimately a different trip because it was a very realistic film based upon the reality of that. The first series continued the story although I had a problem because I'd killed off, and curiously I'd played without meaning to, originally I played the heavy in it, and I'd killed myself off, and I had to find in the first series a comparable weight for Klein, the hero, the protagonist in it, and because I'd killed myself and there was nothing there was just a big hole in it really, and so what I did is the character played by Paul Barber, Malison, between the film and that had a great boost to his intelligence, to his IQ had gone up a considerable number of points really to balance the weight of that. But so I could use this rather talent I have for predicting the future in Star Cops, and it was great to be actually paid to do something that I tend to do anyway, although predicting the future is a very hazardous business that you can fall on your face as well as be right.
I said my bank account box, not the European Police Commissioner's.
That is your statement. 105,000 euro dollars in credit.
I never had that much money in my life.
You have now, Nathan.
This element of prophecy came into view when I was doing Doctor Who. I mean, I originally didn't intend to write Doctor Who because I'd done Play for Today's, the Gangsters, I'd written theatre, plays onto the National Theatre, and I was looked upon at that time as a sort of heavyweight writer with a political slant to some degree. And my daughter, who was then about 7, 8, began to watch Doctor Who when it was on about 7 o'clock in the evening, and she watched it for a while, and then she got a bit scared, as kids do, and said, would I sit with her? And so I sat with her and watched 3 stories, I guess. And while I was watching it, I thought, I wonder what we'll be watching in the future. You know, I wonder what the media will be in the future. And I didn't think much more about it. And then I woke up a couple of days later in one morning, and I had this idea for the basic kernel of the idea for Doctor Who, which was the media 300 years into the future, and what would the programs be, and what would the population be making of it. And so it was a Doctor Who idea suddenly, and I didn't know what else to do with it. So I said, I'll send it to the script editor and see what he thinks about it. And he quite liked it, Eric Saywood. And we met and talked about it. And he said, you have to create this world. You can't just have a science fiction idea. You have to say, what's the world where this is coming in? And I began to think about what that world would be. And Varos turned out to be a prison planet. Originally it had been a prison planet, but it had evolved and was no longer that, although they kept the concept of officers and prisoners was in their constitution. And that gave me the world, and I thought about that. So I wrote all this down and sent it in. But when it got to John Nathan Turner, the producer, he was very, very suspicious indeed. And he kept saying, I don't want Philip Martin on this and doing a political, turning Doctor Who into a political statement. It's quite interesting when it occurs to me now, because it looks as if the new Doctor Who might well have a political content, but that's by the by. And so he gave me a very hard time, because I was an established writer, I had a good track record and what have you, and he started to put me through a process which they put novice writers through. Well, first of all, okay, you've got a good idea. Can you turn it into a script? So they then say, do a screen breakdown, which means you break down every scene. You do the whole script. You don't write the dialogue, but in every scene you say what happens. And it's quite a big job, and it's usually it can be paid for separately, but I wasn't going to get paid for it. And by this time I'd reached a sort of impasse where I just wasn't going to let it go. And so I actually sat down, and it took me about 4 days to do, and I did this and sent back and said, all right, you like the story, there's the story breakdown. What do you want me to do next to prove that I'm serious about this? And he said, okay. So they commissioned me to do that. And then that was for Peter Davison. And then Peter Davison changed to Colin Baker. It was the regeneration thing. And so I eventually, and then Varos had a very strange genesis. Not only that, and the Doctors changed in the middle of it, but then the slot changed. Instead of 4 parts, it became 2 45s. And then it eventually, when it was made, it was done as 2 45s. And again, that caused a great furore. And my favourite letter of all time was in the Radio Times saying that I allowed my children to watch Vengeance in Varos, which to me was worse than the worst atrocities of the Second World War. So I thought, that's a bit extreme. It's a script, you know, and it does get into people's minds. It's actually, people imagine it's far worse than it is, and which is why it works and what it was supposed to do. But it was a good script, and I enjoyed it. And after that, of course, I proved myself to John, and I did 2 more, and providing we were happy with the storylines and my ideas, they were commissioned without any of this other nonsense going on, really. It's nice seeing these things from the past, and it's nice talking about previous projects, scripts, plays that you've written. But, you know, I live in the present, and a writer works into the future. And although series now to me is more or less a closed book, not because I can't do it or not because I want to do it, but there's a new generation, and they tend to think that veterans, because I'm in the veteran stage as a writer, have nothing to say, which I don't agree with, but I don't waste my time going to them anymore. So I work for smaller companies that film orientated, still for television, but people I trust and people who won't put me through the endless committees which seem to be devil writing now. So you end up with programs that are neither fish nor fowl because there have been too many fingers in. When Star Cops was done, when Doctor Who was done, when Gangsters was done, they trusted me, the writer. They were buying my imagination. I was doing something that they couldn't do, and they acknowledged it, and they were quite happy about that. Now everybody thinks that they can write. Everybody thinks they can construct scripts because they've taken the Robert McKee course. Robert McKee is a very valuable tool, but it's becoming almost a cliche because people have understood a few of the concepts of it and apply it religiously, which was never McKee's intention anyway, and it's killing a lot of originality that's on the screen. So I hope to have things on television, and I'm working towards getting things on television, but they'll be done by the independent route of companies like N-Board, which I trust, and also I will write books, I think. I've also done some Doctor Who audio tapes for Big Finish, things like that. And I love television, you know, and I still love it. And it's the theatre of the people to me. And it's the most important art form we have, really. It seems to be debased and it's going through a bad time. But I think it will regenerate and be, in the future, one of the most important records of our existence in our present society form and our time on Earth, really.
Philip Martin, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.